The Destiny community is something you just need to experience to understand. I know I'm already one day late to this video, which in YouTube years is pretty much infinity, but I have some opinions on the Root of Nightmares contest mode and I wanted to share them with you guys. Whichever side on the raid too easy debate you stand on, please don't be a poopy butthole in the comments though. Now, if you're not a Destiny player, first, how did you even stumble across this video? But second, what the hell am I even talking about? At this point, twice per year, Destiny releases a raid which can be tackled by its players. Raids are 6-player activities which require constant communication due to having mechanics that you need to tackle. When a raid is first introduced into the game, it comes out with contest mode enabled. This basically means the activity is in its most difficult form and is the pinnacle of PvE events. This is also accompanied by a world's first race, seeing which team will be able to snag victory first before anybody else. The fire team which manages to do that gets a nice wrestling style belt. And of course bragging rights for all eternity. This year we're seeing drama because the winning team Hard in the Paint managed to complete the raid in 2.5 hours, which is actually kind of ridiculous if you think about it. I'm saying it's ridiculous because 2.5 hours is kind of the regular time for a fairly okay fire team to complete the raids in normal mode. So a fire team managing to complete world's first during contest mode in 2.5 hours is simply something that has not been seen before, at least as far as I remember. Not only that, but we've had the highest amount of completions during contest mode by far for any other raid in the game's history. In order to put this into perspective, last year's raid, Vow of the Disciple, was completed by 6,829 teams. This year's Root of Nightmares has been completed by 45,541 teams. For even further context, last year's Vow of the Disciple was completed by 8.3% of the teams who attempted to clear the raid, while this year's Root of Nightmares was completed by 44.3% of the teams who attempted to clear it during contest mode. Strictly number-wise, the difference is pretty staggering. This might explain why a big part of the Destiny 2 hardcore PvE community is pretty peeved about the results of the raid. Some people would say that's gatekeeping, and I would not disagree completely, but I think it's just that the hardcore players really want to keep the pinnacle PvE event of the year to stay at the same difficulty as it used to be. Personally, I do think this is fine, however I think Bungie was actually going after a result like this. Let's think about it for a second. If the pinnacle PvE event of the year is actually more accessible to more people, that means that more people will talk about Destiny 2, hence more people will actually promote it to their friends. Going into Twitch viewership statistics for a second, you can see that the game is most followed during day 1 contest modes. Not only that, but during this year's contest mode for Root of Nightmares, Destiny 2 experienced its highest viewership count at 517,000 people watching it at a time on Twitch. I believe that this was Bungie's goal at the end of the day. If we think of Lightfall as a filler expansion, this is the perfect time to boost visibility of the game. And why should we think of Lightfall as a filler expansion? Well, I'll make a video on it where we can discuss it in more detail. But considering the final shape is coming next year and it's supposed to be the last expansion for the game, having more eyeballs on it simply just makes sense from a business standpoint. I can see where the hardcore PvE community is coming from and why they have complaints about this, but I also think it's kind of good to have more people completing the raid during contest. And that is simply because more players will be inclined to play raids in the future, and the wider player base might give Bungie some freedom to do some cool stuff in the future. In my personal opinion, that 50% clear rate during contest mode is kind of healthy for the game, and I can give you a personal anecdote on why I believe that. I did actually shoot for a day 1 clear during the contest mode for Deepstone Crypt. The experience was so abysmal and it made me so salty that I didn't go into any raids for months after that. As for Root of Nightmares, well, let me put it this way, I've already spent about 16 hours in it. I am all for difficult content to exist in the game, but it should be manageable by half of the game's population, at least in my mind. And at least at first glance, it seems that Bungie is actually trying to push this style of difficulty to the master content, instead of just the regular version of the raid. Let's however think about why was the raid so simple to complete. From my experience in it, there's one simple reason, and it's just that the mechanics are way too easy to figure out. There's pretty much only one mechanic in the raid, and it's just a relay race. There's just one other mechanic in one of the encounters, and it actually stands out for me not in a very good way because it's a mechanic I like a lot, but it doesn't make sense with all of the rest of the raid. And of course I am talking about the planet room. In my mind it's actually the best encounter of the raid, but it just does not fit it at all since this mechanic is not used anywhere else. And this is the part where I do agree with the hardcore PvE community, where I don't think mechanics should be the reason why the raid is easy. I would take mechanics which are more difficult to figure out over bullet spongy enemies pretty much any day of the week. Yes, damage checks are important and they should stay a part of the day 1 raid race, but I do think that having more engaging mechanics is something which is much higher on the totem pole. Another reason why the raid was so easy is simply that we are way too powerful. There's so many builds out now, there's so many ways to build your character which are all effective that it just makes the game's content far easier than it was created at first to be. And that's a concept a lot of gamers are familiar with, and if you're not, it's called power creep. I do believe we've power crept over the game's base mechanics in so many ways that simply this is just going to be the result. However, However, this does bring us to another issue. Root of Nightmares is kind of easy without contest mode, which brings us back to mechanics and why the mechanics should be more difficult to execute. However, at the end of the day, having fun in the game is the most important part, and a lot of players manage to get their first contest mode clear ever in their life during this raid. And I'm sorry, even though I sound elitist in some of my videos, this is, I think, something that's very healthy and really cool. But I do have to admit, if the raid that comes out during the final shape is anything even remotely close to the Root of Nightmares difficulty, I will be extremely disappointed, and I am sure I'm not going to be the only one. At the moment, I view Ron as a very repeatable raid, and we do need to have some of those in the game. And if I'm being completely fair with it, it's repeatable just because the mechanics, while simple, require a lot of movement and require you to be very quick on your feet, which is a fun aspect of the game that is not stressed very often. The mechanics, while simple to understand, can require some movement tech for you to execute them properly, which is something that I think is cool. And there's still place left for people who just want to be on ad clear and not really think about a lot. At least at the moment, I view Lightfall as a whole, and this raid even, as a filler arc of an anime. In general, filler arcs are extremely skippable, but if done well, they can become fan favorites. I don't think the Lightfall story would be a fan favorite, but I do think Ron can fall into this position. Before we close this off, I would like to stress how much I like bosses like Nezarec, who actually move around and are not just standing there waiting for you to complete something. This did start with Rogue, the Disciple of the Witness, and it just continues with Nezarec, and I hope it continues with any future bosses. Yes, during damage you can cheese him and be on a spot where he cannot hit you a lot, but before damage phase, the people who grab Nezarec's gaze are in a very vulnerable position, and he does go for their head top. Before Rogue, bosses used to just sit around, maybe shoot at you and wait for you to complete a puzzle, but now it's much more interesting because they go in and fight you. For me, that's just way more engaging because the bosses before used to just, do nothing, and right now Rogue and Nezarec are kind of like, okay, so square up nerds, let's fight. So, anyone at Bungie, if you're listening, more of this please. But that pretty much covers my thoughts on the whole Root of Nightmares was way too easy debacle. If you liked this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm, and if you like my content overall, make sure you sub to my channel. I upload weekly and I'll keep on going strong. But that's about it. Eyes up, Guardian, and I'll see you in the next one.